The following episode contains subject matter pertaining to mental health. These topics may be sensitive in nature and could be triggering to some listeners. This episode is not intended to be a substitute for professional or medical advice, diagnosis, or treatment. If you or someone you know is in crisis, please visit your local emergency department or call 911.
Welcome to Teacher Talking Time, brought to you by Learn Your English. Learn Your English is a company that is changing the way people study, learn, and teach languages. Learn Your English offers students and teachers strategies to effectively develop their abilities and skills in their own time. Bringing you the latest in English language learning and teaching, Teacher Talking Time explores all angles for teachers and students alike. Got a question? Comment? A story to share? Send us an email at info@learnyourenglish.com. This is the Teacher Talking Time podcast.
Anxiety about what's going to happen in your country if your country is going through a tough process, political, social, or economical. You worry about your family, you worry about your friends.
They won't really think about mental health because mental health is pretty serious in China. So, and also it's kind of like stigma in China. So we want necessary to relate it with mental health. If you're telling your parents you had mental issue, they just thinking you are getting so weak, so mentally weak.
For the first couple of days, I just decided I said, okay, I'm not going to talk regarding this problem with anyone. And then I couldn't resist anymore. So I just felt that, okay, I have to speak with someone. And then it was one of my peer supporters, if I'm not mistaken, feel that you're not okay, you're not feeling good. So is there anything that I can help you with, or is there anything that you want to speak about? Do you want to have a coffee or something? First I said, no, I'm fine. I just need to be alone for a short time. And then I think it was 10 minutes after that I said, hey, do you have time?
So I approached it 3 times, and my biggest hesitation was my problem's not that big. I saw
minimizing, right?
Yeah, just minimizing it. After that, I thought my classmates are going to look at me weird if I go into the office, because it's pretty apparent, right? It's the Office of Mental Health.
Stigma is such an interesting term because I think that at a broad systemic kind of public facing level, I think that stigma, we've made big advances in terms of what you see visibly. A lot of people will say, well, look at Bell Let's Talk, look at the CAMH campaign, look at what you see visibly. And that's certainly not something that you would have seen decades ago. But I still believe that when it comes down to stigma, when you're talking about individual people, it comes down to who do they feel safe and comfortable disclosing to and talking about. And that really depends on how people have chosen to communicate about those issues themselves. So I think that when you look at individual students, the stigma they feel might be one way with a particular even professor, and it might be a different way with a different TA. It's not that necessarily I feel stigmatized by them, but something about the way they're communicating or the way they are comporting themselves is activating my own self-stigma that I should not be asking for help. I don't know as if I think societal stigma, we've moved a long way, but I do think that self-stigma is still a really big thing. And that is what really can prevent people from asking for help a lot still.
First is we want to provide help when somebody's having a panic attack. And a panic attack is when something triggers you, that trigger brings back bad memories of trauma. And your body has a physical reaction where your heart starts beating really fast. You have the sensation that you can't breathe. You actually think you're dying. So that's why for me personally, I used to get a lot of panic attacks in subways. Subways is a difficult space going to, because I come from a country of war. I've been exposed to really bad things at war. So I'm really, my triggers are like the subway, my triggers are sirens, my triggers are like aircrafts that fly. So I needed to learn how to say that I'm okay at this moment, that I'm not in danger, and that deep breathing that I learned through my therapist. I wanted to make this accessible to folks who don't have this.
World Mental Health Awareness Day is observed on October 10th every year, with the overall objective of raising awareness of mental health issues around the world and talking about what more needs to be done to make mental health care a reality for everyone. The topic of care was the inspiration of this episode. The original idea was drawn from our own struggles as teachers in helping our students and our feelings of frustration in not knowing what our school offered in terms of help, and how the school could actually help our students. Then we realized that probably most teachers, if not all, everywhere, might be in the same position. Research for this podcast has helped us immensely, and we hope teachers and institutes will find what follows helpful, if not, of course, incomplete. Today's focus is on post-secondary and international study, where mental health rates among university and college students are on the rise in Canada.
If I showed you a graph of the demand over the last 20 years, it's like this. It's just constantly increasing the demand.
If you look into campus life in Canada today, this is one of the things that you hear about, that there's a mental health crisis. 1 out of every 5 post-secondary students across the country has some kind of mental health problem, be it anxiety or depression. That's from a recent national survey of colleges and universities across Canada. That's right, 1 out of every 5. And the thing is, a lot of them don't get the help they need. So the question I have is, if you're a person with mental health issues, how do you get through school?
For those of us in education, the question remains, what can we do? Issues of mental health can be even tougher in a new country, in a new language, in a new culture. International students, refugees, and other newcomers experience mental health as anyone else would, perhaps more so, with factors like stigma, shame, and survivor's guilt lingering.
Well, I see people here for counseling as part of a more holistic service. And the main presenting issues, I would say, would be post-traumatic stress. People might not know that it is post-traumatic stress, but when they start talking about insomnia, flashbacks, hypervigilance, we can often relate it back to some traumatic experiences they've been through.
For youth especially, we find that whenever we talk about mental health issues that they're facing, they talk more about self-esteem, so having low self-esteem, facing identity crisis, low sense of self-care, risk into sort of self-harm, and we also now, we're seeing a lot of suicide among newcomers, or youth talking about suicide when it gets to the extreme cases.
As instructors, many of these people are our students. The aim of this episode is to try to unpack all of this at least a little bit, to listen, to learn, to raise awareness, and to continue the discussion. There are three segments to today's show. In segment 1, we talked to 3 international students in Canada to hear their perspective on mental health. In segment 2, Natalie Roach, the mental health coordinator for Toronto's Ryerson University, joins us to talk about strategies instructors and programs can implement. In the final segment, we talked to Sakina Mihar, one of the co-founders for startup Savintech, an app designed to help newcomers and refugees with post-traumatic stress disorder. This is a very special episode of Teacher Talking Time. We usually say, thanks for listening, but in this case, really, thanks for listening. To kick things off, we sat down with 3 international post-secondary students in Canada.
So my name is Pedram. I was born in Iran, and then I immigrated to Dubai, Turkey, and Cyprus as well. And now I'm here in Canada.
So my name is Sophia Shanahan, and I come from Venezuela.
Okay, so I'm from China. My name is Elaine. I'm studying at Ryerson as a finance student, and I came to Canada for 2 years.
I came here last year on September 3rd.
I came 6 years ago, and I went to school first in ILSD in Montreal. Then I took English at ILAC in Toronto, and I took publishing at Centennial College.
Before looking at what we can do to serve them better, we thought we should listen to their thoughts, experiences, and insights on mental health. These are their stories. I'm gonna read to you. I'm gonna talk about some statistics. And I want you to tell me if you think they're based on your experience at university in Canada or otherwise, if you think they're surprising or not. Okay. So according to a Globe and Mail study from 2018, 44% of Canadian higher education students were surveyed. There were a lot of them. Almost 44,000 students were surveyed. Okay. And 44% of them said that they felt depressed over the previous year and that they felt it was difficult to function. And that was up from 38% in 2013. So a 7 or 8% increase over that period of time. That report also said that 70% of mental health issues start in childhood or adolescence, and that currently in Canada, suicide is the second leading cause of death among youth aged 17 to 24. And the report also goes on to say that university and college or post-secondary services have seen a huge spike in requests from students for help with mental health. They're estimating over 400% increases in requests from students to the services of schools for mental health assistance. So my question to you is, what is your reaction to those statistics? Is that surprising, not surprising, based on your experience as a student, talking to friends, yourself, and just being in a university environment?
Actually, to be honest, it didn't surprise me. I could kind of guess that. I mean, I can see that, especially between my classmates, or doesn't matter if they're international students or they're domestic students. Mm-hmm. Whenever we're talking together, I can see that they're kind of frustrated or disappointed, no matter it's something related. There is something that they are disappointed of. I mean, I don't know whether it's something family related or financial related, or I don't know, interpersonal relationships that they have, I think. So based on the conversations that I have or had, these numbers didn't surprise me.
To me, they're really high. I mean, I had no idea there were so many people seeking for help, and I'm happy to know. It's surprising the percentage of suicides in teens, because it's I had no idea that it was such a problem.
It says it's 24% of people in Ontario who die between 15 and 24. 24% of them is by suicide.
It still sounds pretty high to me.
To be honest, I don't think it's very surprising to me. It's kind of like I know this is something happening, but I just don't know the exact number. Yeah.
Okay. It's not surprising to you.
It's not surprising because I feel the problem with mental health is like you need the full family to taking care of it, and that is the hard part for entire society.
So again, focusing this episode on mental health for students, for international students, generally speaking, post-secondary education. The first question for you is what, in your opinion, what additional stresses and factors contributing to mental health issues do international students face that other students may not? I mean, stress, anxiety is part of education, no matter what you're studying or where you're from. But being an international student, what additional stresses might those students face?
For example, language can be a huge stress factor, and it can cause a lot of anxiety every time you go to the classroom and try to talk to your classmates or even your teachers.
I think the first one, the top one, gonna be in the language. If you are not an international student who come from a language like English country, the language is gonna be the biggest problem, because when you trying to make friends, try to communicate with others, even just doing like daily grocery shopping, if you couldn't speak well, it would be like pretty embarrassing to going out. In my first year in Canada, I was so stressed because when I first got to Canada, I couldn't really order coffee by myself. So that was caused me I feel I was actually depressed. I don't know how I can do better to improve my language. When I first time trying to join some meeting, going to a weekly meeting, I couldn't I barely understand anything.
Also, there's a lot of anxiety about what's going to happen in your country if your country is going through a tough process, political, social, or economical. You worry about your family, you worry about your friends.
First thing first, especially in that time of the global environment, especially political situations that we have, I think the rate of currency of different countries is constantly changing.
Mm-hmm.
So I think one of the most important things that students are dealing with are financial issues.
And another one will be financial stress, because for international students, you actually, for this semester, I paid triple than domestic students.
Right.
Yeah. Also, another one could be money, because as an international student, you're not allowed to ask for student loan, for example. And it's a huge stress to just go at the end, till the end of the semester, and be sure that the program's paid off and you're still going to be able to eat and to get your clothes. And especially in Canada, you have to get all your winter clothes, which is, it's not cheap. So
right.
I can say that the least stressful thing for me was my grades, my performance.
How much do you think culture plays a factor in, the phrase getting help is not the best one, but in approaching or asking for help or sitting down with somebody and talking about it? We're talking about the international student community. So students coming from many, many different parts of the world. The topic of mental health has many different connotations in different parts of the world and different cultures for a variety of reasons. Do you think culture or cultural background of international students prevents them from asking for help? As an extension of that, in your culture, how much is it discussed, just generally speaking? I would say there's probably a stigma everywhere, but to what extent is there a stigma? Is it still a large stigma? Not so much. And did that affect your decision to seek help or not seek help when you were here in Canada?
Sure. So back in Venezuela, there was still a stigma I think it's been changing over time as a good thing.
Mm-hmm.
But there is still this thought of, I hate to say it like this, but it's like, I'm not crazy. I don't have to go to a psychologist or a psychiatrist.
Mm-hmm.
And there's this thought of, I don't want my coworkers to know, or I don't want my family to know. The stigma is pretty much there. But certainly coming to Canada was pretty eye-opening for me.
Okay.
When I saw that there was a lot of talk about depression, anxiety, and many other mental health issues. And that helped me a lot to understand that it was okay, that if you were sad or you were depressed, it was okay. And it was okay to talk about it because you were not alone.
Yeah, I would say people won't necessarily try to, if you feel bad today, they won't necessarily to say it's something related with mental health. They probably just say, we had a bad day today. I'm not feeling well today. They won't really think about mental health because mental health is pretty serious in China. So, and also it's kind of like stigma in China, so we won't necessarily to relate it with mental health. If you're telling your parents you had mental issue, they just thinking you are getting so weak, so mentally weak. I do feel embarrassing in some certain degree, but not a lot. But when I actually feel depressed, I wasn't sure I actually wanted to go to ask for help, because when you try to get the help, you have to know where to go to get the help and who's the right person to get help, and isn't the person I trust him, I can talk to him, and does it gonna have the effect? Is it just wasting of time?
More specifically, and part of this episode as well is it's mostly for instructors and education professionals, but it's for anybody who deals with mental health, and I think we can assume lots of people do. Most people, almost everybody does, to some extent. And part of, as we know, going through that process is hearing the stories of other people. So are you willing to share an experience that you had with mental health as an international student here in Canada?
I have a story from the first day that I came here, that the teacher asked us to introduce ourselves to he divided us to 5 different groups, and he asked us to introduce ourselves to each other. And then it's something really common in our culture that when we are introducing ourselves, we say that how old we are. And then I introduced myself, and then someone else introduced herself, and I asked her that, okay, how old are you? And then I saw that reaction on her face and other group members' faces, that because they were from the same country.
Right.
So I felt really embarrassed. So definitely, I think something like this happens to every single international student that puts him or her in this awkward situation. So, and after that, I think that these intercultural barriers wouldn't let them to take it a step further and then talk about, especially mental health issues.
So I said earlier, when I got here, I couldn't speak English. I merely can understand people. And the way I managed my stress was just literally crying on my pillow every day. Yeah. So after I got in university, I was struggling doing assignment, but it was very good. I had a tutorial with Leo for several sessions. So my essay writing was totally fine. So that was kind of released my stress. But besides that, so as a new person to Canada, and I was looking for a job, I was looking for part-time job, and I need to be more good at my time management. All of these things just making me feel like I'm not good enough.
So what did you do? When you found yourself in that situation, that it's hard to talk to people and you're becoming stressed and anxious, how did you resolve it?
So I was just trying to ignore it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think it's pretty bad, but I don't know what else I can do, so I just ignore it. I was so stressed, I couldn't really function. I don't want to get up, I don't want to eat. Yeah, it was pretty bad, but like it was like a few that kind of day, and I just stay at home, try to get rid of the depressed, and try to like encourage myself, go back to school, go to those events. I just trying to ignore it. It's not a good way, but that's what I did.
Okay. Yeah. Did you end up talking to anybody about it?
No, really.
No?
To be honest, not really, because I don't think it's a good way. Like, so even I have some friends in Canada, but sometimes it's very hard to talk negative things. You don't want to like spread the negative around you. You want to show your positivity. But when you're so stressed, you couldn't do that. You only can like feel that like alone.
So going through my main program at college, but also in my language school, because this has been an ongoing problem, as we know, is the problem in Venezuela, the political problem, social crisis, and economic crisis. I remember one time I was during class in French school, and I was following a big protest that was going on in Venezuela. This was back in 2014.
Mm-hmm.
And it was a youth protest, and we all knew that it was going to end up pretty bad. I was following the protest during class, thing that I shouldn't have done, but I did. And I got pretty upset when I looked at the news and I saw that a student was shot in the protest. I immediately left the classroom. My teacher at the moment, she was French. She was amazing. She went right behind me, and she knew what I was doing. Like she knew what was going on in Venezuela and everything, and she knew that something had happened. And She sat down with me, and she asked me about it. She listened to me. She accompanied me. She shared a couple of tears and shared my frustration, and I knew that she was taking a couple of minutes out of class, but she did it because I was one of her students, and I really appreciate it. Also, during college, I had kind of not the same situation, but it was the same root of the problem. It was the Venezuelan protests and the political and social climate. And I just found myself unable to study. I just couldn't focus. I just couldn't read, couldn't go to class and put my head on it. I used to take my laptop to class, and I was just looking at the news while I was in class. Yeah. And I just said, my program is what is going to give me the future here in Canada, and I have to focus and concentrate. I have to look for help. It wasn't enough to go home and talk to my family. It was just like feeding the monster in a way.
When you dealt with your stress, anxiety, feelings, did you use the university services, or did you just talk with your teacher, talk with friends, and work your way through it? How did you deal with or cope with what you were feeling?
I kind of needed an outside perspective. And I have to say that it took me a couple of attempts to go to the office of mental health and ask for an appointment. I kind of walked in front of it a couple of times, and I saw brochures of teen suicide, of teenage pregnancy.
What were your hesitations of going inside, and how many times did you approach it before you made an appointment?
So I approached it 3 times, and my biggest hesitation was my problem's not that big. I saw
minimizing, right?
Yeah, just minimizing it. After that, I thought my classmates are going to look at me weird if I go into the office, because it's pretty apparent, right? It's the office of mental health.
Right.
But I just couldn't take it anymore. And I just went in, I made an appointment, and I'm very glad I did. I still remember some things that this person told me, this social worker helped me with, and it still helps me nowadays. When I'm out of school already, I'm working, and I still think about what we talked about in like 2 to 3 sessions in that office. So yeah, that was my experience.
Honestly, no. I have no idea why I didn't try that. But yeah, I think it was because after that I talked with my teacher, my problem solved, kind of. So I just didn't see any need to follow up.
Are you comfortable talking about it in English and in Chinese, or you prefer it in Chinese?
To be honest, I prefer in English, because when you speak in your first language, it's more more emotion connect with mental health. When I talk in English, it's more like very distant things. I just describe the things. There's no much like the stigma connection.
So as you said, of course, there's going to be a language barrier between I don't know if psychologists or whatever, I don't know.
Mm-hmm.
There is definitely going to be a language barrier between us. And then, yeah, I would rather to talk with someone who I know. When Bryson introduced us the Keep Me Safe app, I tried to use that app. Mm-hmm. But the thing is that they didn't have any Farsi speaking mentors on that program, so that's why I just gave up using that app. And
okay, when you say tried to use it, did you ever talk to somebody, or you just didn't use it when you found out they didn't have Farsi?
I checked the menu and I realized that there was no Farsi languages.
Do you think international students would be comfortable using an app like that if their own language was an option?
So I think I had like 200 friends from China, and Mandarin is one of the languages that is available on Keep Me Safe app.
Okay.
But I think out of that 200 friends, I think 2 or 3 people just use that app.
A very low number.
Yes. Students are more likely to speak with the teachers or professors rather than someone from outside of the school.
After you decided not to use Keep Me Safe, what did you do?
For the first couple of days, I just decided to. I said, okay, I'm not gonna talk regarding this problem with anyone, and then I couldn't resist anymore. So I just felt that okay, I have to speak with someone, and then it was one of my peer supporters, if I'm not mistaken.
A peer supporter is a university student position within Ryerson to help guide and give advice to new students at the university, specifically in the ESL Foundation program.
Who came to me and then asked me, he said, okay, recently I feel that you're not okay, you're not feeling good. So is there anything that I can help you with, or is there anything that you want to speak about? Do you want to have a coffee or something?
That's great.
Yeah, first I said, no, I'm fine. I just need to be alone for a short time. And then I think it was 10 minutes after that I said, hey, do you have time?
Is mental health something, in your experience, that students talk to each other about?
I think people mostly just talking about I feel stressed lately and I feel bad because I couldn't do the job well, but they not really saying they have mental health problem. And even some students say, I think his or her friend doesn't really think that's serious. Maybe the person just being dramatic. That's my opinion. Yeah, I don't think people really think it's a problem.
Okay.
Unless you're showing very like a very serious sign, like you're getting so sick.
Right.
Yeah.
In your estimation, do students know about and are aware of how Ryerson's mental health services work?
As what I know, I think most people don't know.
Okay. Why do you say that?
Yeah, because I did research on my communication course, which is about mental health resource on campus. And I interviewed a group of people, including international students and local students. Most of them don't really aware of school. Like they know school have no resource, but they don't have what exactly that is.
And then you also have the benefit of being able to speak about a language school experiences in Canada as well, where traditionally, and for obvious reasons, mental health departments don't necessarily exist. These mostly exist in colleges, universities, of course. What do you think, I don't know if advice is the right word, but from a student perspective, from a management perspective, teacher perspective, what can language schools do better to help their students? If there isn't a department, and we'll set aside whether or not the departments are approachable or not just for now, but if a department doesn't exist internally in a school like a language school, what can those schools still do to be proactive in offering assistance to those who need it?
Sure. So this is something that I discovered long after graduation. There's community services eager to help anybody. You don't need any ID, you don't need anything. It's totally anonymous. You just go, you wait for a social worker to meet you, and they can help you. Like, it wouldn't be something like having your own psychologist, because it would be a different person maybe every time you go in. That's the case most of the time.
Right.
But the service is there. And even if language schools don't have the service in-house, they can alert people about the services outside of the school.
Is mental health something that was done or talked about in orientation? Is it something that you feel comfortable talking about with your friends, with your peers at school? Or is it something that is kind of, not just you, but with other students, that's not talked about?
No one has talked to me about the mental health, especially in orientation week or during orientation, by saying that, I mean no one from the student university staff had talked with me about the mental health issues or the things or issues that I may face during my study. I think it's one of the real important factors that should be addressed, especially in orientation weeks, at least, that we have here at Ryerson and other universities. I don't know why, but unfortunately, that this year I'm working as a peer supporter as well. So I had to attend the 2 days of orientation for the peer supporters here at Ryerson. I think too many different things. They spoke about too many different things and subjects. But unfortunately, I think, forgot to speak about mental health issues, or at least the services that we have here at Ryerson. They didn't mention anything about it.
Let's take a quick break. We'll be right back.
Whether you're a student, teacher, education professional, or anyone experiencing feelings related to mental distress, don't hesitate to seek the help you need. There are services available to support you. If you're in the Toronto area, 211 Ontario is a great resource. They have information about all sorts of counseling and support group options, such as addiction, child, youth, and adult mental health, and in-person crisis centers. 211 also has live chat and text options on their website, so they can be contacted at any time. Head to 211toronto.ca for more information. That's number 211TORONTO.ca. You can also visit number 211.ca for information on other provinces offering this service. It's one of the many available mental health tools in Canada. Again, that's 211.ca. Remember, if you feel anxious, depressed, or alone, you are not alone, and there's always someone who will listen. Help us continue the dialogue and end the stigma, not only on World Mental Health Awareness Day, but every day.
Well, my role is a little bit unique. It straddles two departments, kind of three at Ryerson.
This is Natalie Roach, the mental health coordinator for Toronto's Ryerson University. She works at an institutional and community level to bring dialogue and programs of change to those who need it.
Mine is more how do we as an institution have programs, policies, initiatives that address mental health and well-being at more of a kind of community and institutional level. So that role was created in September 2015, and that's how long I've been in this role. And
Natalie talked to us about services inside and outside of post-secondary institutions available to students, stigma, signs of mental health, what teachers can, should, or should not do, and much more.
And it is one that straddles student well-being as well as workplace well-being services. And I have what's called a dotted line to the Office of the Vice President, Equity and Community Inclusion. And my role is one that sits at an institutional level with mental health.
And I mean, there are various studies about this, and you can maybe tell us if some of the statistics are accurate or not. But the articles that point to increases in mental health cases in post-secondary education, some say 3 to 4% per year. Do you think that there really is a rise in the number of cases, or that just now we're more aware and more cognizant of students needing help, and we're noticing more cases than we did in the past?
I think that it's both things together. I think that I don't think that we are seeing an increased level of mental health. I think that what we are probably seeing is a result of more awareness happening at an earlier age. So students are coming out of the high school system and they're more familiar with disclosing and receiving help and accommodations for mental health related accommodations. So you're going to see that increase as well happening in the post-secondary sector as well. I received these accommodations in high school, and now I'm expecting to receive them as well at the post-secondary level.
Okay.
So yes, and those increases are obviously going to carry through, so to speak. What's interesting too, I think, is considering that what people conceptualize as getting help or conceptualize as being healing may not be counseling, right? Like for them, it might be a different avenue. It might be visiting one of the equity service centers and finding healing through advocacy and, becoming comfortable with their gender identity. And that was something that was healing for them. So I think that in various ways, I think that students are becoming much better at help seeking behavior. That is something that I think is really increased in the past maybe 10 years. So I don't know as if it's necessarily an increase. There's obviously, you can say an increase in terms of pressure and demands and rapidness of information, change in the labor force, those kinds of things. But I do think that we're seeing the result of a lot of awareness campaigns having an effect.
Is the stigma, does that mean then, as a follow-up, do you think the stigma has been reduced if kids are being, or students are being exposed to it at an earlier age, high school, even elementary perhaps, and being taught that asking questions and talking about it is okay, that when they get to the university level, and in many cases probably, the parental cushion is removed, that they're able to talk about it independently?
I think that on a broad systemic level, stigma is such an interesting term, because I think that at a broad systemic kind of public facing level, I think that stigma, we've made big advances in terms of what you see visibly. A lot of people will say, well, look at Bell Let's Talk, look at the CAMH campaign, look at what you see visibly. And that's certainly not something that you would have seen decades ago. But I still believe that when it comes down to stigma, when you're talking about individual people, it comes down to who do they feel safe and comfortable disclosing to and talking about. And that really depends on how people have chosen to communicate about those issues themselves. So I think that when you look at individual students, the stigma they feel might be one way with a particular even professor, and it might be a different way with a different TA. Like I might not feel stigmatized by this TA, which is why I feel comfortable disclosing to them. But with this one particular professor, I don't know. It's not that necessarily I feel stigmatized by them, but something about the way they're communicating or the way they are comporting themselves is activating my own self-stigma that I should not be asking for help. I don't know as if I think societal stigma, we've moved a long way, but I do think that self-stigma is still a really big thing. And that is what really can prevent people from asking for help a lot still, if that makes sense.
Absolutely. Yeah, no, that's a great answer. And obviously there's lots to go into the mental health discussion, and there's lots of perspectives we're focusing on from the teaching perspective, but obviously from the student perspective, there's lots of, as you say, lots to be considered as well. Given that then, and we'll get into some specifics here in a second, but from the teaching perspective, in terms of teachers or instructors referring, getting involved, not getting involved, is it worth differentiating between mental health in terms of illness and learning disabilities versus stress and pressure that comes with academic and social life?
It's a really good question. I think that there's been, I know, some talk lately at the high school level about focusing a little bit more on resiliency and really being careful about not using clinical language around the normative experience of an academic course of study that is going to have stressful elements to it. So an academic course of study is pressurized. It is difficult. It is challenging. It is going to have times where you feel stretched and that you feel pushed, right? Mm-hmm. That doesn't necessarily mean that you are experiencing clinical depression, that you are experiencing clinical levels of anxiety. So that's a very interesting question. And I think that as a teacher, I don't know as if a teacher needs to worry about discerning whether or not a student is experiencing normative versus non-normative stress levels, as much as they need to make sure that they let their students know that they are open should their students feel that they are not able to cope, mm-hmm. and setting that tone early on in the classroom. So, kind of setting up for students, school is stressful. An academic course of study is a stressful experience. It is going to be difficult. It is going to be challenging. That is inherent in this. You are resilient students. You wouldn't have gotten here without this. However, if you feel that it is going beyond what is normal and beyond what is manageable and beyond what you were able to cope with, I really do hope that you will approach me. I think that that's more where teachers can come in and really kind of be a positive message in terms of differentiating.
Great, and then that's destigmatizing as well. I think that's a great piece of advice. In that case, let's extend that analogy a little bit further. If, as a teacher, I do have a student after that, conversation or a discussion, class discussion, a few weeks later or whatever, a student does approach me and say that I'm having these feelings, what is my role, or how should I navigate that as the instructor in that case?
Well, I think the first thing you want to do is, it sounds like you're talking to me about a case where you're not hearing anything about a student not wanting to end their life, or like this is a critical level. Correct. So this doesn't sound like it's at that stage, because that's a different protocol. If a student is kind of saying, hey, like I need some extra support here from what you're saying, I think the role of the teacher is, to the best of their ability, to try to be informed about what the resources are. So whatever their setting is, so whether they're internal, whether they're external, and in most cases, I mean, at a situation like where I am at Ryerson, we're lucky enough that a lot of them are internal, but that's not the case for a lot of people. But if they are, able to just be aware of what are the resources that are available for the population of students or the demographic of students that I teach, should they be experiencing this? Because it always helps to be prepared for if that might happen and passing those along to the student. And then maybe also, I think, being ready with certain questions of networks that the student might have available to them. Mm-hmm. So, do you have a faith community that you have here that you could access? There might be an imam or a faith community leader that they could approach for support. They may or may not have family there. They may or may not have a family doctor that they could approach, but just being prepared with certain questions that they could answer to help the student set up a support network that is going to get them the help that they need. And I think that for the teacher in that position to recognize, I am here to help this student set up a network and set up a path to healing, basically, mm-hmm. while recognizing I am not that person. I am a conduit for them, because I think that can be the really difficult place that teachers can find themselves in, is I want to be that, not that they want to be that person, it's out of a good place. Their heart is in the right place, but they can sometimes get drawn out of their lane, and that can be a scary place for a teacher to be in.
Right. Yeah, I think that's also great advice, because I mean, as teachers, and this might be a generalization, but we're always in a position where we want to help our students and want to have the answers. And obviously in these cases, we're self-aware enough, hopefully, that we don't have the answer, and there isn't an answer, obviously, either. And we're not, at least speaking for myself, not diagnosing anything. I'm not trained to do that. I don't know how to do that. So knowing where to refer, even if to refer, or just if the student wants you to listen, perhaps, as well, knowing, going through that process. But yeah, in whatever school you would teach in, knowing what the processes are, and referring them that way. It brings up a good question. I think in a lot of schools that aren't structured like universities, private schools, etc., who may not have internal mental health help available, is referring externally advised, or is it just going back to what you said, kind of helping them set up their own network?
Yeah, but I mean, it's a difficult question. To be honest with you, that was the question that actually, one of the questions that you posed that I thought the longest about, because, and I think that especially today, because I have a personal, I guess, in some sense it's wonderful, but I have a personal there's a lot of capitalizing now on mental health. There's a lot of companies that are offering services for mental health. You see a lot of accessible therapy options being offered at low cost. Mm-hmm. And in some sense, that's wonderful, I think. But I think it's also difficult because you don't necessarily know what are the best services to refer people to, what's going to be the most helpful. So I think that
I definitely have no idea. I don't even know what I wouldn't even know one, to be honest. So that would be very difficult.
Right. And I think that maybe in that case, I don't know as if I want to say no, don't refer someone, but I think that what I would want to do is if a teacher were to find themselves in a place where, wow, I have not yet confronted this before, I would want to say to the student, listen, I'd like to do some investigating about some resources for you and get back to you. Mm-hmm. And then I'd want to get in touch with some kind of community agency that would be able to at least direct me a little bit better. If it's a young woman, maybe getting in touch with the YWCA of Toronto, getting in touch with Newcomer Services to Toronto. If it is an international student, getting in touch with, if it's a racialized person, like Women's Health and Women's Hands, or Across Boundaries, getting in touch with a reputable community agency that could refer you to reputable places in the community where they could get help. And if the person does have a family doctor, to refer them to their family doctor, as that is going to be a good first step to get help. I'm always in favor of linking someone up, if possible, with a person, as opposed to you should sign up for Talkspace, right. Which is not necessarily bad, but it's also just that you don't necessarily know the person's financial situation. I think that Talkspace could be a great tool. That's just one example of like an accessible therapy option. But I think that I would first want to say to the student, let me try to get back to you about some resources. And even if you can find out about wait times, but just do a little bit of investigating, I think. And listen, like I don't think that it should be dismissed that sometimes someone does just need a listening ear, and you can feel that that person feels strengthened and able to go on and has developed even just enough resilience and like, wow, like that was really helpful. And I feel like, thank you. But if you can tell that person, there's sometimes where a student might just need like a little bit more support to get their own support, if that makes sense.
Yep, absolutely.
And I think that there's no kind of prescriptive formula for that. It's something that you can tell from the individual student. And I think that would probably be a case where you probably would want to, without disclosing tons of details, but maybe bring in your supervisor about, is this something that we've encountered before? Is there particular places that we do like to refer? Do we have anyone that we can reach out to, or a preferred referral source? Like, what do we do in cases where there isn't a family doctor? Like what kinds of support can we offer? But making sure that as a teacher, you have some kind of support so that you're not operating alone. And, you might be getting input. You might be able to find out information that you didn't realize.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, that's always the interesting case, right, where students, and not just about mental health, about anything, usually I find, or at least in second language classrooms or ESL classrooms, they're much more comfortable conveying or communicating sometimes very private elements of their life, even just for practice, or just they feel comfortable with their instructor. So in terms of mental health, and from a teaching perspective, and you can refer to Ryerson policy or just general advice that you have, where is that line or that boundary between trying to be helpful versus kind of not prying, but sometimes conveying or communicating to somebody else private information? So again, not necessarily in critical cases, but if there is an average situation, let's use that word just for lack of a better term, but where am I allowed to relay information a student gave me regarding their mental health? Are there privacy policies in place? What am I allowed to tell somebody else in those cases? The only reason I ask is a lot of students will say, hey, I want to talk to you, but please don't tell anybody because this. And if I'm doing, and again, we're not doctors, but doing that, maybe the student needs to talk to somebody who's not me because I can't help them here. And maybe by talking to them, I might actually make things worse. I don't really know what to do. I think I should suggest that they be referred, or I'm going to ask somebody for advice. What information can I tell somebody else?
That's a really, really great question. I think that you framed it really well. It's that you share as much information as you need to get to ensure that they're going to get support. So you are disclosing to the level of ensuring that they're going to get adequate care. So I can share an example from my very recent history. A student reached out to me, and she's a master's student. She's really struggling. She thinks she needs to take a leave of absence. She disclosed during that conversation with me some very personal details about what's going on in her family situation. And I was saying to her, I really think that you need to get in touch with the counseling center. What I would like to do is give them a call, because I have a relationship with them, and let them know kind of that you're going to be calling, and a little bit of background on your situation. Is that okay with you? Because I want to make sure that you get the support that you need. And she said, yeah, that's okay. I'm not positive. I'm going to reach out. And I said, okay, I really think that you would benefit from it. I'm going to make that call, and I'm also going to follow up with you in a few days. Is that okay? And what I shared on that message wasn't her mom did this, and then her mom did this, and then her mom did this. It was just, she's going through a very difficult family transition right now. She disclosed those details to me. I think that she could benefit from this. So it's making sure that there's enough information that they can identify who this student is based on the message, because they get a lot of phone calls. Mm-hmm. B, have a little bit of information about kind of the level of criticalness basically, for lack of proper English way of saying it. But, and then, you know, I also like to always, this is not related to what you said, but I always like to say to the student, like, can I follow up? Like a question to follow up. But I think in terms of disclosure, a lot of people have that. And my kind of go-to is safety trumps privacy, like always. So I think that in terms of, you can disclose enough information to get them the support that they need.
Okay, let's jump then into some critical cases. And I think we know what those might be. Our role then changes, right, as a teacher. So if a student does disclose something that we would characterize as critical, at least in the university, or at least in your context in Ryerson, what should I do as a Ryerson instructor in those cases?
In those cases, again, like, I know that I am repeating myself here, safety trumps privacy. So if a student, like if you're external to Ryerson, if you're a teacher who's external to Ryerson, I would say as much as you, if the student is off-site and you're not in touch with them, and this happens over email, and a student were to indicate to you that they're wanting to end their life, try to get in touch with them before you get in touch with emergency services. But if not, you just get in touch with emergency services, and then you can send an email after the fact and just say, I'm really highly concerned for you and I want to make sure that you're safe. So I got in touch with emergency services just to make sure that you're safe and sound, whatever language works for you. If the person is with you, and you're not a Ryerson instructor, or you're not a Ryerson teacher, I would, again, just say to the person, listen, I want to either go with you to the emergency room, or I want to sit with you while we call 911 together. I'm going to sit with you until they get here. I'm really highly concerned for your safety. You're telling me some things that are really concerning, and I really care about you, and I want to make sure that you're safe. And like, they might say, no, it's not that bad. It's not that bad. But like, safety trumps privacy. And sometimes, like, it's better to be safe than sorry in those cases. Mm-hmm. And internal to Ryerson, the same policy would apply after hours, what I just said. But if it's within hours, you can always call the counseling center and say, I have a student here. I'm concerned about their safety. I'm either going to walk over with them, and you would walk over with them, and you can do that to the medical center as well.
Great. Yeah, I think, and it's kind of sounds weird to say, but I think the extreme cases are always seemingly maybe easier to navigate because they're extreme, and we don't really have another option other than to take action immediately versus, students who, nothing critical, but might be struggling, might not be struggling. What do we do? I had a student last year who I suspected of being autistic, and I didn't know what to do, to be honest. It was a language barrier as well. And it wasn't anything critical, but it was clearly that he was very smart, but struggling academically in the class. Nothing that's his fault. And I talked to some people and I got some advice, and we eventually got him some help. But it took a while, and I didn't really know how to handle the situation. So I think those ones as teachers are more difficult because it's not critical. It's not immediate. We think something's going on and we're not really sure what to do. And we're going to take a little bit of a turn here, but this applies more so for ESL programs and students whose language is not English as a first language. And there's lots of things when they move to Toronto or Canada or any country that's not theirs. There's culture shock and there's natural stresses that happen there. Ryerson's very good about giving seminars and workshops for us in terms of noticing signs of stress, anxiety, potential mental health, but at the same time, a lot of these signs are, at least in my opinion, quite general or could apply to lots of different things. Is there any advice you have for teachers about noticing signs? I mean, we're off the top of my head, some of them, mood swings, consistent absences, drop in hygiene, these types of things, which could be a sign of distress, but also could not be at the same time. So is there any, we take that a step further, any further advice that you have for us in terms of noticing those types of signs in our classrooms?
I think that when I think about the things that I have heard when I've been delivering those same workshops for teachers has been, when I think about the things that are specific to teachers, it tends to come out electronically. So those might be the markers that are specific to teachers. And what I mean by that is, what is the timestamp on the email that the student is sending you? It doesn't mean if a student is staying up late at night, oh, they must have a mental health issue. But are you getting 3 emails in a row sent at 3:30 in the morning, 4 o'clock in the morning, 5:30 in the morning on a consistent basis? Like, what's happening with that student's sleep pattern? And are they kind of erratic? Like, are they not really coherent in their thinking? Are they not really appropriate emails to be sending to their professor? Do they speak of someone who might not have a support network such that they're reaching out to their teacher or their TA and speaking this way to them? Like, that is something that I've heard in workshops, like, this is not an email that you should be sending your teacher. Or a very, very, very inappropriate reaction to a grade. That's another really big one. Like a very extreme reaction to what is not necessarily that bad a grade. Like, one teacher that I had ended up actually having to call emergency services because the student said, they indicate they're going to end their life because of a grade they received. And it was a low B.
Oh, wow.
That is an incredibly extreme reaction. So, like, these are the types of things that I find that teachers are seeing. Another one too is things that embedded in assignments, like just assignments veering way off track, like personal writing essays. It's like, oh, we want you to write a reflection piece. And halfway through this reflection piece, I've heard 2 actually teaching assistants tell me this. They were reading halfway through this reflection pieces, and these are in 2 completely separate departments. And it's like very disturbing, like what started to come out on paper, to the point where like it could have been a sign of like early psychosis. So those might be the types of things that might be specific to what teachers would see, that you're really only going to see in the context of teaching, a teaching relationship.
Okay. No, and I think that's a really good example, because I've seen that. I think most teachers would have seen something disturbing in writing. What reaction is appropriate thereafter? So I'm reading, or if let's say I'm that teacher, I'm reading a reflective piece or any piece of writing, and somewhere in there's a disturbing paragraph or something about inflicting pain, or just a dark thought or something that's disturbing. I say, oh no, okay, so this student needs help. What does Andrew do at that point?
Well, I can say I thought the TA in this case had a great reaction. He was newer, and he approached his professor, and I think that in that case there's precedence, and that there's an understanding that whatever work is shared with the TA is shared with the professor as well. So it's not a necessarily a privacy issue. So he approached his professor and said, I'm really disturbed by this passage, and shared it with the professor, and decided to approach the student privately, individually, and said, hey, I just wanted to speak with you about your piece. Like, I was concerned by the middle passage, and that you went pretty far off course. And I just wanted to check in and see, like, are you okay? And like, there's resources here. And I think the student did end up getting linked up with resources, and said, like, was going through a really dark time when I wrote that. I do feel a bit better now, but maybe I should reach out to someone. And I think that, like, so the point isn't necessarily where the student went. Like, I'm really hoping the student went and got support, obviously, but I think that the TA not ignoring that, reaching out and getting support for himself, saying, hey, like, just wanting to, get another pair of eyes on this and getting some support here, and then reaching out to the student. I thought that was a great way to handle it.
Is that inappropriate? That's great. Is that the professor in that case? Is that inappropriate? How would we approach the conversation with the student? Are we going to be just forthright about it and say, hey, I read this, I thought it was a bit off for you, are you okay? Or do we need to be more indirect and more discreet about it?
I think that it might depend at that point. Like, it depends. That's one where it's probably going to be dictated by the relationship you have with the student. Like, is it paper one, you don't have a relationship with the student? Then it might be an email to the student, hey, I was hoping I could speak with you after class, like something a little bit more discreet or whatever. Or do you have a relationship with the student such as you can just kind of shoulder tap them next time you see them and say, hey, can I talk with you for a minute? But I think that in that case, I mean, my personal recommendation would be to find a way to speak with them discreetly. And if you can't, like if you've stopped seeing them, to send an email saying, I would like to see you. And then if you don't hear back from that email, just at the very least sending, I was really concerned and here's some resources for you. I really hope that you utilize them and please do come by and see me. Great. So just doing the best that you can to reach out and see the student. If you don't hear from them, then sending resources.
Following up and just checking and making, and again, letting them know that we're there in whatever capacity that they need. Obviously, I guess the end story of this is we can't force students to get help. And if they say there's nothing wrong, we can't pry, we can't push it, but letting them know that the resources are available seems to be the consistent philosophy here.
And that you're available. Mm-hmm. Yeah. If they want to approach you.
The other, or the last thing that I wanted to touch on is the kind of the opposite. So we've talked about, a great thing that the stigma, or whatever word you want to use, is lowering, and students are being more autonomous in seeking help. But the opposite part is back into the classroom itself. And again, our context is ESL, so the classrooms are much smaller. They're not hundreds of students in a lecture or something. But what advice might you have for teachers how to integrate those students that have mental health issues, in whatever capacity that means, into the classroom to foster cooperative learning?
I think that in most cases, maybe, and I certainly don't want to stereotype, but I think maybe especially so in an ESL type setting, students are really highly motivated to learn and want to be there, want to be part of the classroom. And typically, like, students with mental health challenges, want to be part of the classroom. And usually their being there is a sign that they're able to be there and they're able to cope. And there might not need to be any accommodations that would be noticeable to others. So what might be helpful in those cases would be, with those students outside of a classroom setting, saying to them, if you need to take a break from class, if you need to step out for a minute, just take care of yourself and do that. You don't need to let me know where you're going. If you need to go and listen to music for a little bit and then come back, if you need to take a break, or you're having trouble focusing and come back, I think that what is so important, let's say the student is returning after an absence, after they've been missing classes. Mm-hmm. What is so, so, so important is to make that student feel welcome. We are glad you're here. I'm glad you're here. I'm glad you're back. Everyone is glad you're back. And we want to make sure that we do what we can to make sure that you stay.
Great.
I think that that's probably the best.
That makes a lot of sense. I think that's a good way to tackle it. And I'll leave you with this one. This area, especially with post-secondary education, has come a long way. And as you've mentioned, in high schools as well, in terms of providing services, providing help, providing aid, providing even just ears for students to listen to students who need to talk. But nothing's perfect. So what improvements would you like to see in terms of how this is dealt with, or not dealt with, but navigated in post-secondary, in any type of institution? What improvements do we still need to see in terms of mental health?
Oh, wow. That's a really, really good question. I think that my dream would be that all students were assigned a mentor for their entire first year. All students would have a mentor, and that mentor would ideally be a staff member, so that staff member then would be required to know the services in and out, be familiar with, what the issues are that students are facing. I just think that so much of this comes from this feeling of having to navigate so much on your own. It's such a decentralized environment. And I would love to see just required mentors. I think that could be one way of tackling it. And in terms of outside the university sector, much more funding in community-based mental health programming, because I know that we were talking earlier about where do you refer when it's external. It's you refer, but the thing is there are such long wait lists. Mm-hmm. And you don't want to be referring people to the emergency room. You don't want to be hoping it's an emergency situation.
Right.
And I just really think that we could do so much more if you could refer someone to a community-based counselor and it wasn't like a 6-month long wait list, you know? So those would be some of the things I would like to see.
Let's take a quick break. We'll be right back.
Hello, friends. This is Leo from Learn Your English, and I have a very important message for all of you. As a teacher, I've had students approach me with questions about mental health, and most of the time I was unsure of how I should answer or even handle the situation. In fact, this is true of teachers and education professionals everywhere. It's really important for all of us, teachers, students, administration, community members, everyone, to be up to date on what our own institutions offer in terms of mental health assistance and what external options do exist. The more information we have, the more likely we are to make referrals to the appropriate locations and for those individuals to have success. Please check out our blog post for this episode on our website for links and descriptions of recommended options. Help us continue the dialogue and end the stigma, not only on World Mental Health Awareness Day, but every single day.
So we started saving tag as a personal need.
That's the voice of Sakina Mihar, one of the 4 co-founders of digital platform Savintech, an app designed to help newcomers who suffer from post-traumatic stress disorder. In segment 3, Sakina joins us to discuss life with PTSD, transitioning to Canada as a newcomer, why mental health services must have multilingual options, and their inspiration for developing Savintech in the first place.
We are 4 co-founders. We are all immigrants to Canada, and all of us have the lived experience of PTSD.
Years ago, I had a brain problem during a concert. I started to be scared of feeling this pain at any time. I was afraid to come back to work, being outside or even by myself. I kept my main door open just in case something could happen during my sleep, and I didn't talk to my friends and family about it, and finally kept this anxiety for myself.
I'm an immigrant from a country of 4. When I moved to Canada, I remember very clearly the first time in my neighborhood I heard silence. I froze. My heart started beating so fast. I felt this immense dread come over me, and I thought I was in a situation at war. I couldn't move and I couldn't breathe. This is what panic attack looks like for me, and these are the effects of PTSD.
PTSD is post-traumatic stress disorder. A lot of people don't know what PTSD is. So once we came to Canada as immigrants, we started having panic attacks, or we would feel anxiety around things that are known as triggers. And we, like all of us, the 4 of us, we didn't know what it meant until we actually got help and we were identified with PTSD. So we actually met at a hackathon where we were pitching for ideas to have startups. And I pitched my idea for a mental health app. And because my other co-founders have lived experience, we connected over the hackathon. And that's how we started our journey.
Wow, that's fascinating. So you all met there, and so you had no idea that each other had gone through that experience, and you just kind of came together and formed this all as a partnership?
Exactly. And it has been truly serendipitous. We did not know each other. We work really well together. And also because all of us are immigrants, we have this instantaneous connection because English is not our first language. So sometimes we struggle to communicate when we I get you. Let's slow, let's be patient, so we really work well together.
Just out of curiosity, what are the first languages of the co-founders?
It's Mandarin, French, and for me, it's Tamil.
As teachers, or at least in my experience, all the services that we've been promoted to refer students to are all English services. So was there not, or is there not something out there that helps students in their mother tongues? And is this why you kind of started to promote this type of service?
Exactly. There are lots of PTSD apps out there, specifically in the US market and globally, but they're all in English, mostly in English. There are a few Arabic apps available that is available in the US, but not necessarily in the languages that we speak in Toronto as a majority. So when we were brainstorming our ideas, the basic features obviously has to be developed in English, but we also realized when we were developing it is, there's a big difference when you hear, for example, so we have three main features. Let me talk about the three main features.
Sure.
First is we want to provide help when somebody's having a panic attack. And a panic attack is when something triggers you, that trigger brings back bad memories of trauma. And your body has a physical reaction where your heart starts beating really fast. You have the sensation that you can't breathe. You actually think you're dying. And the only way to stop that is to tell yourself that you're not dying, you're okay in this instant, and you have to do deep breathing. So there is a big difference if English is not your first language to hear this in English versus your own language, your mother tongue or your first language. So there is a comfort in hearing these instructions or these affirmations or these breathing exercises in your first language, which really helps you calm down, because a panic attack is immediate reaction. And for the brain to process instructions in English and then follow those instructions doesn't work as well as when you hear it in your first language. So that's why for me personally, I used to get a lot of panic attacks in subways. Subways is a difficult space to go into because I come from a country of war. I've been exposed to really bad things at war. So I'm really, my triggers are like the subway. My triggers are sirens. My triggers are like aircrafts that fly. So I needed to learn how to say that I'm okay at this moment, that I'm not in danger, and that deep breathing that I learned through my therapist. I wanted to make this accessible to folks who don't have this as and because it's an online platform, they can access it wherever they are. The struggle with PTSD is people don't know they have PTSD.
Right.
I didn't know I had PTSD when I came here. I did not know, my other co-founders did not know what they were experiencing was called a panic attack, for example. It also depends on your status as an immigrant in Canada, your access to healthcare. So if you are a refugee, there is this in-between period where you don't have your OHIP card to access healthcare. Or if you do access healthcare, or most new immigrants and or newcomers or refugees, the focus is on settlement-based services. So how do they live? How do they, learn English? Where are they going to work? And it's less on mental health. It's getting better, CAMH has programs that teach therapists to look out for PTSD, especially within the refugee population that's being settled. But it's not as much.
Okay. Is it more common in your experience to have, for immigrants in any country, is there a higher rate of PTSD among immigrants than non-immigrants?
Actually, Canada is very surprisingly, there was a study done, more than 10% Canadians have PTSD.
Wow.
So in the West, we are either at number 1 or number 2 for PTSD.
Okay.
With PTSD. So they didn't exactly tell the reason. Is it because we have larger immigrant population? We don't know, but that's a pretty large number.
It's a large number. Does the study go into more detail? Because you said that most people, or I don't know if most people, but a lot of people don't know that they have PTSD. Of that percentage, do all those people, are those the ones that know they have it? Are there more that maybe don't know they have it? Or
exactly.
So there could be, realistically, it's a higher number.
Realistically, it's a very high number. And PTSD is not specific to immigrants or refugees, right? It's anybody who has gone through trauma.
Of course.
If you were in a car accident, for example, you're scared of getting into a car, or you're always looking at the back. So like, if you have gone through trauma, then experiencing or reliving that trauma, or a trigger that makes you think you're in the trauma, triggers you.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I was going to ask you about that, because there's lots of different definitions of what PTSD actually is, but there's a lot of consistency in those definitions, right? So, for example, the American Psychiatric Association uses the word trauma. They also say that in the U.S., for example, approximately 3.5% of U.S. adults have it, and 1 in 11 people will be diagnosed with it. But based on what you said, being diagnosed, it's only the people who then know that they have it. So the number is probably, or very likely, a lot higher, right? Mm-hmm. And then based on trauma, but trauma could be something from very dramatic, like war or sexual assaults. It could also be from, not that car accidents are not dramatic, but maybe less so than those examples, or subway noise and noise related. So what advice do you have for people who maybe they think they have PTSD, they're not sure? I'm sure it sounds like there's a lot of gray area. At least there would be for me, thinking, am I just a little bit anxious, or maybe I have PTSD? Is there a way to kind of navigate that?
That's a good question. My advice would be, if you have access to healthcare, is to speak to your doctor and get help through either social workers, counselors, or psychotherapists. Mm-hmm. Because trauma is also very personal. It's a person's ability to say, like, for example, if I was in a car accident, I would not consider it too much trauma, whereas somebody else would consider it a big trauma. So there isn't, mm-hmm. can't really define trauma, because it's a very personal thing.
And sometimes what we end up finding traumatic is not something that we would have expected to find traumatic, right?
Yes. And irrespective of how you define trauma, the response is the same. Mm-hmm. Right? So you're feeling high levels of anxiety. You have this stress. The extreme of it is to have a panic attack. And panic attacks are really, 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 really scary.
Okay, so let's dive into that a little bit, because I've never experienced a panic attack, and your platform and your app to be helps people walk them through it. So one question I had is panic attacks do have an acute nature to them, right? So we don't mm-hmm. know that they're happening. Correct me if I'm wrong on any of this, because I'm certainly not an expert, but we don't know when they're going to happen. And when they do happen, as you say, they're very impactful and very serious. So the techniques mm-hmm. that you and your team have implemented into the platform, would it be helpful for users or potential users to have walked through those steps prior to having a panic attack? Because in that moment, I imagine it might be difficult to open the app, to get your phone out, to go through it, just because of how acute panic attacks can be.
Mm-hmm. So ideally, that's why I'm calling it a platform. We have to do enough outreach to people to educate about what is PTSD. When we were doing, we actually won an award and some funding for this platform.
Yeah, I saw that. Congratulations.
Thank you. So when we were doing the pictures and the presentations, there will be so many people from the audience who come to us and say, you know what, I think my parents have this. And they speak this very specific dialect of Cambodian. It's not, and when can you release your app in Cambodian language so that I can give it to my parents?
Right.
So there is this very educational piece where like people listen to our story and go, like I know somebody who has this symptoms and I think they have PTSD. So because we are finding not a lot of people know PTSD, I think we have to do this education outreach work as well as provide the actual instructions to work on or do homework on or how they breathe when they actually get a panic attack. So there is pre-work to actually using this app.
Does the pre-work also extend to family and friends? I know having PTSD might be is a very personal thing, and someone might not be comfortable sharing that with others. But let's imagine that they have, just for an example. So if I'm with my friend or with my brother or a family member, and they start to have a panic attack out in public or even at home, I've gone through the platform, I've gone through the app myself, and I know the steps. Even though I don't have PTSD, I can help them in that situation. Would you advise that?
Actually, that's something we have to test, and I can only speak from my personal experience. Can I speak from my personal experience?
Absolutely, that'd be great.
So when I had my panic attack, I didn't know I have PTSD. So when I had my first panic attack, I didn't have a name for what I was going through. So I was actually, I'm married. I have my partner was not with me the first time I had it, and I didn't tell my partner what happened to me. I didn't share with my partner because I was quite. There wasn't a sense of shame. There was a sense of, I'm very strong because I was thinking to myself, this was my thought process. I felt this, I can't handle this because I've been through worse. I'm right now in Canada, something happened. I don't know what happened. It's just something that I have to get over. Because I was telling myself, I've gone through a really bad war, I can handle this. And I did not share it with my partner. And I remember when I first had that panic attack, I can't talk about it. It's actually, currently when I'm talking about it, I'm reliving my trauma. I've gotten better at it, but it's like your body is completely shut down. You have a brain freeze. Your heart is racing really, really fast. You are not breathing. And for me, it was when I first heard the sirens, I thought, okay, something is going to happen to me. And then I think if somebody had either touched me or spoken to me, I would have gotten really, really startled. Mm-hmm. I was on my own. I was just huddled in one space, sitting. I just sat there for a long time. I did not move. And then I guess because, I had that moment of panic and my body kind of adjusted and I started breathing better again. That's when I got up.
How long did it take for that, what you would say, the intenseness of the panic attack to pass?
It felt like a really long time, but I would say it's probably about I can't recall.
Okay.
Maybe 2 minutes, maybe 5 minutes. But when you're in that moment, it's really, really, really.
It's a total physical response.
Yeah, and you know how you see people say, when you're in trauma, you everything goes in slow motion, and like the time feels very stretched. That's kind of how you feel.
Let's take a quick break. We'll be right back.
Hi, everyone. Even if you don't know someone who is struggling with their mental health, you can still get involved. There are many great programs and foundations doing amazing work right here in Canada. Bell's Let's Talk has opened the dialogue. Sick Not Weak, headed by Michael Landsberg, helps us understand that mental illness is a sickness, not a weakness. Saving Tech helps those with PTSD. It's a big community. Together, we can keep making progress around the concept of mental illness. Join the movement and help us continue the dialogue and end the stigma, not only on World Mental Health Awareness Day, but every day.
So because, the responses, so my other co-founder and we have a video on our website explaining what a panic attack looks like for different people. My other co-founder, she was actually in the subway and she was having a panic attack. She couldn't breathe. She thought she was dying too. And she was in Montreal.
4 years ago, I was living in Montreal, very far from my family and my hometown. And one day I was in the subway on my way to work, and suddenly I felt this huge pain in my chest. I couldn't breathe. I thought I was going to die. I was very embarrassed to ask for help at that moment. Afterwards, I went to see a doctor and I found out it was a panic attack.
And then later on, she went to the doctor because she had access to doctors, and that's when she was diagnosed with it. So I would say we need to educate about what a panic attack looks like, and we have that video to say this is what it could look like potentially.
Good.
And then for friends and family, you need to have, because our platform is focusing on a very specific thing. If you're having a panic attack, right now we just have affirmations, and affirmations don't work for everyone. In 4 languages right now,
I was going to ask you how many languages you have. So you have, which of the 4?
We have English, French, Mandarin, and Tamil. So the affirmation is saying everything is going to be okay.
Everything will be okay.
一切都会好的. Tout va bien se passer.
Ellam Sariya Varum.
Okay, so that's the line.
Yeah, so this is one of the affirmations my therapist gave me, just to ground myself, to say, okay, you're going to come out of this. But this is an affirmation is used for somebody who knows, who's been diagnosed with PTSD, who knows they have PTSD, and who have got tools in their box to cope with a panic attack. So the first tool is to do breathing exercises. So that's what we are focusing on right now. We are writing and recording scripts to on box breathing. So box breathing is used in the army and by the SEALs, and a lot of scientific studies prove that it really helps calm the body down if you're having a really flight mode response to triggers and traumas and things.
Let's do some deep breathing together to help you feel better. To help you focus on your breathing, Find a quiet, dimly lit environment to practice breathing. It will help you focus on the practice if you're new to it. We will go through 4 steps in this exercise. So what it does, how you do it is you inhale for a count of 4. Step 1. Slowly exhale through your mouth, getting all the air out of your lungs. Step 2. Inhale slowly and deeply through your nose. 1, 2, 3, 4. You hold your breath for a count of 4. You exhale for a count of 4. You hold your breath again for a count of 4. So it goes in a square and you repeat that. And the holding of the breath actually releases carbon dioxide in your blood, which actually has this calming response.
Okay.
And effective. And this is what I use myself. For example, I know walking into a subway, it's still like my heart, heart beats a little faster when I need to go into a subway. So my response is, because I know I'm going to have this response, I need to prepare my body. So I'll do this breathing exercise before I get in.
Wow. Yeah. Thank you for sharing that experience with us. That's a good example. So that begs the question a little bit, depending on the trauma, and you make a good point that it's very hard to define trauma. Because on your website, you recommend that, or one of the steps, or one of the maybe follow-up steps, is for people using it to write about the trauma. Is that, I guess the question kind of is, does PTSD simply go away? Can it be reduced? Are there steps such as writing about trauma help to reduce these traumas? Or and maybe it's a personal answer, maybe it depends on each person, but in your case, going to subways, will the trauma, the trigger be reduced, and how can that happen?
So PTSD never goes away. You will always live with it. The only a person who's gone through trauma, so the 3 features we focus on are for 3 types of healing. So the panic attack, so the breathing exercise we're doing, it's for if you're having it's an immediate response. If you're having a panic attack, do some breathing, calm down. But it does not help you not get another response if you have a trigger. So for long-term healing, there are many strategies that therapists recommend. There's exposure therapy, there's written exposure therapy, there's journaling. There are different types of therapies you can follow for long-term healing.
Mm-hmm.
And we are focusing on, because it's a platform, our intention is to get this to the folks who need it with no cost.
Right.
And so writing is actually a really good form of therapy. Writing and the written exposure therapy is when you're exposed to the trauma, but it's guided and very intentional, so that you are able to revisit that trauma and heal from it and say, okay, I'm okay now. So there is like a specific set of questions we ask, what are you afraid of right now? And then through the reasoning process, your therapist will recommend, you're in Canada right now, you're physically safe at the moment. What are the chances of something bad happening? So that reasoning, it has to, the exposure needs to happen, but in a very contained and intentional way. The other feature that we have, which is proven to work really well, is called eye movement desensitization.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
You verbally retell. What it does is it diminishes negative feelings that's associated with trauma. And this, it's how your brain is wired. So you focus on this movement that's going across
So imagine if your screen, your laptop screen, and imagine there's like a ball that's bouncing from the bottom left to the top right, and it's constantly moving, and you just keep following that movement with your eyes, and then you verbally retell your trauma. Like, I felt really bad when I heard the sirens because I thought I was going to be exposed to a bomb or something like that. And you verbally retell what's happening to you while keeping your eye on that movement. What it does is your left brain rewires in a way so that over time, when you keep doing these sessions, you associate less trauma to that trigger. So when I keep doing these sessions,
wow,
associate less trauma to hearing the sirens. And it's almost like rewiring your brain.
It's such a good venture. It's such a good idea. We talked about this earlier in the show, but one of the biggest challenges, perhaps hurdles, or just realities of newcomers to Canada, international students, refugees, immigrants, etc., is, as you mentioned, lack of, or at least initially, lack of healthcare, lack of accessibility to medical professionals. So I think in this case, this is absolutely wonderful. And from the teaching perspective, this is something that we can grab onto and really recommend to students if they come to us, and that they don't always, and as we know, but if they do, this is something that we can advise them, refer. I'm assuming you would recommend not only using this platform, use it in conjunction with medical help, either by therapy or otherwise, right?
Absolutely. Okay. Absolutely get help. Our long-term goals for this platform is to actually work together with hospitals and therapists, and Good. Where they can recommend these exercises, but also keep track of how the patient is doing. Because when you're in therapy, the therapist will assign you a lot of homework, and if you don't do that homework, your recovery is not going to be better. Okay. Because the therapist is not with a patient 24/7, but a panic attack or trauma can happen throughout the day. So ultimately, our goal is to turn this into an app that includes biofeedback, which includes, okay, how is my patient sleeping? Are they sleeping throughout the night? If you see the patient is not sleeping well, then like maybe the set of therapies that is not working out. So maybe you need to switch strategies. So getting that feedback back to the therapist, which would lead to better outcomes for the patients, which then ultimately leads to better, there is actually a health burden in Canada right now, which is 3.5 billion. Mm-hmm. There's a lack of resources. There's actually a shortage of psychotherapists. That's because they are, still working on patients. They're not able to monitor the patients 24/7. They're not able to get that feedback immediately, which means, the outcomes are not that great. A lot of refugees are actually using it because there's less stigma attached to using technology versus actually going to a physical doctor.
Fascinating.
So that you're not stigmatized.
Wow. Yeah, I was thinking about that as you were talking, and I was wondering, there is and I was going to phrase it as a stereotype or maybe a myth, but that's just in my mind, and maybe you can debunk it or confirm that it is a myth, that at least in my experience with students, even ones that want to come forward and are asking for help, again, the services, at least of schools, usually are English only, and perhaps maybe this is the myth, they are not as comfortable going forward if they have to do it in English. And even then, as you say, lack of resources, or lack of doctors, lack of therapists, the wait lines or wait times can be lengthy as well. So a digital platform, I think, is a great one. Is it a myth that newcomers or immigrants have a harder time? You used the word shame earlier, and I don't know if that's appropriate or not, but is it a myth that newcomers have a harder time coming forward with these types of issues?
A newcomer goes through a whole lot of emotions. First is grateful. I would say so if you're coming in from traditionally South Asian, Middle Eastern, African kind of countries, there's this gratitude and indebtedness that's kind of in our culture that's also built in. So you're grateful for being safe. There's also, what do you call that? It's called, I think it's called survivor syndrome, where you feel this guilt that you survived when your family didn't make it.
Right.
And you're safe. Then you're also struggling with language. Language is really, really hard. If you're not able to communicate with someone, how do you overcome that barrier? I think I speak English well, but I struggle a lot to put into words what I'm thinking, because English is not my first language. So I'm like, why can't I just say the thing I want to say? Like, because what happens when English is not your first language is you're constantly translating in your head, which is also very exhausting. The way the languages are structured, the grammar is different, the verb is different, the verb comes first, and so, and then like when you don't speak English well, or when you're speaking to somebody and they don't get you, then you kind of go back into your shell and you don't want to say it again. So there are like a lot of emotions and things for newcomers to unpack, and that's probably the reason why they don't come forward with what they want. But there's obviously always there's the shame and the not shame. I don't like to use the word shame.
Yeah, I don't like that word either, but I know what you mean.
There is the stigma of mental health, and it's more acute in certain cultures, but even in Canada, like nobody talks about mental health. It's only recently we've put so much effort to be more open about it and share and say it's okay to be not okay, and this is what not okay means. This
is such a fantastic idea, Sakina. You and your team should be very proud. I'm sure you are very proud of yourselves. And looking at your website, you have won an award, as you said, the Social Impact Award. You guys have won, and I'm sure you'll win many awards going forward, because this is extremely useful and it's needed. The point of this podcast and the point of all of this is to talk about mental health, but also for those in any country, but in this case in Canada, of those whose English is not their first language, and this will be a big aid to them. And so I thank you for doing it, and your team, and I'm glad that you were able to come on and talk about it. If folks are interested in what you're doing or want to get in touch with you, how can they contact you?
It's savingtech@gmail.com, SAVYNTECH@gmail.com, and you can also visit our website, which is savingtech.com, SAVYNTECH.com.
Beautiful. Great. Sakina, thank you so much for joining us. This was very insightful. The purpose of the podcast is to try and educate and teach lots of people, and I learned probably more than I've learned in a long time talking to you for these few minutes, so thank you so much.
Thank you very much. I'm really honored to be here. Thank you.
This concludes our show on mental health. Mike, Leo, and I would like to thank everyone involved in the show for their generous time, support, and insight. This episode was inspired by our own struggles and a feeling of helplessness helping our own students. We wanted to open the dialogue about how to do that, and mental health in general, especially for those who are new to Canada. We hope we've accomplished this somewhat, that you found value in listening, and that we all continue the march towards even more dialogue and ending the stigma. Please see our blog post about this episode for links to mental health care centers which come recommended from the professionals involved with this episode. If you have a comment, feedback, or just want to talk, please don't hesitate to reach out to us. info@learnyourenglish.com. I'm Andrew. Thanks for listening to others, and for keeping the conversation going.
You've been listening to Teacher Talking Time, brought to you by Learn Your English. Ready to take control of your education? You're in the right place. Teaching, professional development, learning. Expand your world with Learn Your English.